Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here, with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one's going to be for volume 13 of the light novels, which is called Alicization Dividing. And yeah, this is the 5th volume in the Alicization arc, and I believe there are 5 more to come, so I think overall it is a 10-volume story arc. And yeah, here we are at the middle point, more or less, of the arc, and it's a pretty interesting point because you know, you can think that, wait, this could come to an end very quickly, but there's very clearly still, I think, a lot more to get into with the dark territory, which is still been only, I suppose, vaguely alluded to, that like there's this threat coming, and it feels like we haven't seen enough of that yet, despite it otherwise feeling like we're getting towards the end of where we need to get to with, you know, the confrontation against Quinella. So clearly I think in the next volume something pretty big is going to happen that kind of changes the direction of the series. But yeah, very eventful volume this time out. We move away from volume 11 and 12 being very focused on the backstory, the setup of things, of here is the origin story of Quinella and the Cardinal and why the world is the way it is. And it feels like we're now into, you know, the pretty kind of heavy drama character moments as we approach what I suppose the characters feel is getting towards the end of where things are going. So eventful volume with I suppose 2 main arcs of like Yu-Gi-Oh on his own and what he gets up to, and then Kirito and Alice kind of having to team up to get out of their situation. But yeah, let's quickly cover some of the stuff, the color pages in the volume. Actually, I suppose the cover. So we have Kirito and Alice, very nice on the cover. Nothing too much to say there. On the back we have our usual chibi image. This time it's Yu-Gi-Oh and Berkuli, who is the first Integrity Knight, in a bath together, with Yu-Gi-Oh wishing that it was actually Alice in the bath with him instead. This is a reference to something that happens in the book, which is that Yu-Gi-Oh actually fights Berkuli in what is the bath floor of the tower that they're in, the cathedral. Doesn't actually happen like that, but it's just obviously meant to be a kind of joke that goes off that. Yeah, I suppose quickly we'll read the back here. To catch you up with, I suppose, where the story is at this point. Following a mighty clash, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh find themselves separated for the last leg of their journey to the top of Central Cathedral. Kirito, forced into an unlikely alliance with Alice the Integrity Knight, continues his climb from the outside while trying not to fall to his death. At the same time, Yu-Gi-Oh must face off against the Integrity Knight commander himself, Berkuli, Synthesis 1. Although the journey is nearing its end, they'll soon learn that the cathedral is full of surprises. So yeah, that's definitely what it's about. More happens, and there's some surprises towards the end. But anyway, color pages. So the first one is, as it said in the back, Berkuli versus Yu-Gi-Oh and their fight. Pretty nice. Interesting note here: the most powerful Integrity Knight and the wielder of the time-splitting sword. Talk about that a bit more later on. Second 2 color pages is the Kirito and Alice storyline. This specifically being the big moment where I suppose Kirito is forced to reveal the, I suppose, truth to Alice and how she comes to take it. Does she just dismiss the truth about the Integrity Knights and who she is, or does she actually take it on board? The last 2 color pages before the map is the big reveal that comes at the end of the book. That being that Yu-Gi-Oh has been transformed into an Integrity Knight after some manipulation, but it's a big shock to everyone that this has even happened in the first place. The map is of Central Cathedral, of course, and more or less the entire book takes place from about floor 85 to like floor 96 or 7. I don't think they exactly cover which floor numbers that they're on, but they're right up there towards floor 100 where Quinella, the administrator, is, and obviously like Yu-Gi-Oh and Alice, Kirito and Alice are on the outside, Yu-Gi-Oh's on the inside, and that's where the entire book takes place, more or less. They do cover, I suppose, the floors where the other fights take place in the previous volumes, which is cool. But to give you an idea of just how far we've progressed in this giant structure. But yeah, so let's get into talking about the book. As I said, there are 2 main plots in it, Kirito and Alice, and then Yu-Gi-Oh's plot. But there is a third, and it's only a very small one. It's the interludes, and that obviously means we're back in the real world on the Ocean Turtle in terms of, I suppose, what is at this point it's Asuna's plot, kind of watching over Kirito as he's kind of recovering being in the machine that he's in, which is causing him to be in the underworld, but it's also healing his brain after the injury he suffered at the end of the arc. The basic reveal here is that Asuna informs us that apparently, and she's very suspicious of this, tomorrow Kirito will be healed and he'll be up and talking and everything will be fine. She is suspicious of this, but hopeful as well that she'll finally get to, I suppose, see him again tomorrow after, obviously, he's in this position because he saved her from the attack at the start. Other than that, it's just a little bit of conversation between Asuna and Rinko about, like, where exactly are we on the ocean? You know, we roughly know where we are, but we don't know exactly. They then spot this other ship out in the ocean, which is sort of coming towards them. And then one of the commanders comes over to them and says, like, oh yeah, that's that ship. But then they notice that it changes course suddenly, and they're, like, shocked that this has happened. So something else serious is going on that's going to, I suppose, cause some issues to happen here, so it won't go quite as smoothly. Not really sure what's going on exactly right now. I think there's probably still a lot more going on in the real world story than meets the eye right now, and I'm very interested to see how exactly that takes place, because we know that, like, a day in the real world can be, like, you know, up to like a year or so in the actual underworld game, such as the time acceleration. So I don't think it places too much of a kind of clock on things as such, just establishing that, okay, like, there's still, Kirito's still got a bit of time in the game, even if it only seems like a day in the real world. But that's interesting, but there's not a whole lot to say other than, like, okay, something's about to happen, and I assume we'll probably get one interlude chapter in the next volume, and then maybe it'll become more important at some point. But still intriguing, but don't have too much to say about it. Then the other two plots. I suppose we'll cover Kirito and Alice's plot first, because Yu-Gi-Oh's plot ends up, I suppose, being the most, essential in a way to what happens really here, in terms of the big reveal of this book being Yu-Gi-Oh's transformation into an Integrity Knight. So Kirito and Alice, they end up, after being obviously sucked out of the side of the building at the end of the last volume, Kirito saves Alice by basically sticking his sword into the side of the walls of the cathedral and holding on to her. And they're basically in this situation where, look, if you don't help me get out of this situation, we're both going to die here. So she's kind of forced to kind of calm down with the attitude and actually assist Kirito to get them back up to safety. They basically established that they're down on, like, floor 85 at this point, but the only, like, entrance on the side of the building back in, since they can't break through the walls because they're so powerful, is that they have to get up to floor 95 from the outside. And they're basically just staying on the side of the wall by sticking their swords in and sort of, like, either holding onto them or, like, standing on top of them. And they know that it's sort of over time breaking their swords, and as powerful as their swords are, they can't just survive at will with them standing on top of them. So they have to do this kind of a crazy situation where, like, Kirito generates these sort of grappling hooks, and he keeps kind of firing them up higher on the wall to get them up higher. And they sort of establish this pretty cool dynamic that, because Alice is an Integrity Knight and has sort of, in a way, lost some of that free will she had as, I suppose, just a normal kind of person in the underworld, she sees what, like, Kirito is doing as sort of, like, crazy. She can't understand how he's sort of so calm despite these crazy situations. And similarly, Kirito is a bit shocked to see that Alice is so taken aback that just because something hasn't gone as they expect, she's sort of almost frozen in this situation, that they would have been killed if not for, I suppose, Kirito's ingenuity, basically, which we know has always been, like, a skill that he has, but it's kind of emphasized here to an insane degree, because it's more or less been established to be the big difference between Kirito as, like, a real person diving into this world versus the Flux Lights, is that Kirito has a lot more free will, whereas they seem quite sort of locked into their rules, and that gives Kirito sort of the ability to kind of maneuver around the rules a little bit more, whereas they're very rigid. And it's been one of the coolest dynamics between characters that we've seen up to now, and it gives a reason in this story for Kirito to sort of be different than everyone else, while also establishing, obviously over the last couple of volumes, that the Flux Lights can become more like Kirito by breaking free of the kind of system control, by breaking the seal that's on their right eye, which is actually something that Alice does over the course of this volume. It's something we saw Yu-Gi-Oh! Do last, it was probably 2 volumes ago at this point, but that comes back up. And the idea that happens here is just that as they're forced to work together, Alice begins to, I suppose, trust Kirito a little bit more, not just see him as the criminal breaking the rules, and kind of beginning to see that he's not actually that bad of a person. He's just he's odd, of course, but he's not doing anything wrong as such. And she begins to start believing him in terms of aspects of his quest, which is obviously to destroy the Administrator and so on, and stop the Axiom Church and what's happening with the Integrity Knights. She begins to really start to believe that, where about like halfway up to floor 95, they spot these statues which come to life. They're like gargoyles. And immediately it's revealed that these are Dark Territory monsters. And this is a shocking thing to Alice because, as far as she's concerned, there should be nothing flying above the level of about floor 30. That's the limitation that's placed on all of their dragons, the Integrity Knight dragons, and anyone who even has, I think, the ability to fly, if they have that system command. No one can go above floor 30 like that. So for her to see basically Dark Territory monsters up on the high sacred floors near the Administrator is this kind of really world-changing event in a way for her, because obviously, as much as the villains in a way of this arc have been kind of the Integrity Knights, the Axiom Church, and Quinella, they also do a good job at this book of constantly reminding us of that they are the only ones fighting against the Dark Territory as well. But suddenly here's the Dark Territory in like the center of the opposition in a way, and how is this even happening? And they have to fight them off. It ends up being a fairly easy fight because they're just established to be like minions and not really like high-level monsters. So it's not too much of a threat. It's just they're in a precarious situation hanging off the side of a building. They end up getting past these monsters with fairly little trouble. But I think the big things come into play are when they finally get to a place where they can sort of rest. They don't have to worry about falling off the whole time. And they can finally have their conversation, and part of it is that it's them talking about like the Dark Territory. It's partly them talking about Kirito's mission and what he will do afterwards, but it's also the moment where Kirito sort of slips up a bit and reveals to her for the first time something about her old life, basically, and immediately she wants to know more about this, and it starts this idea of like, he wanted to keep this away from her because they wanted to use the daggers that the Cardinal had gave to them, and that be the way that they kind of switch Alice back like almost instantaneously. He didn't want her to go through the whole like piety cube thing where it could potentially kill her if they find the correct memory that like her transformation has happened through. But she, as the first thing he says is that like, you have a sister, and she's immediately kind of all over this, and he's forced to sort of reveal the full truth to her, and because she's very suspicious and skeptical about this whole thing, he has to go through all of this in a lot of detail about trying to convince her, and he goes through the whole thing of like, okay, the first thing that really, I suppose, gets her believing him is that he just flat out says, okay, as far as you're aware, you're an Integrity Knight, and that means that you come from basically heaven and are sent down here to be this sort of holy knight, basically. But the people on the surface, the way they know how to become an Integrity Knight is that if you win the big tournament where all the best swordsmen come together, you basically are taken away and you become an Integrity Knight. So immediately, it's another world-shattering moment of just her origin story is suddenly completely taken apart by the fact that it's just this thing that happens like almost every year. Someone becomes an Integrity Knight, and it's just the way you win a competition. And so she begins to accept that, okay, she is just a human who has maybe some impressive powers and privileges from being a knight, but she can't quite wrap her head initially around the fact that, but no, you're trying to say that like my memories have been altered. And eventually, like after he goes into as much as he knows about her, that like, this is your full name, you're from this village, you have a sister, your sister is in a way just like you, and that she's very skilled at like system commands, and you were taken away because of this event, because unlike the other people who are like strong swordsmen and stuff like that, you were actually taken and chose to become an Integrity Knight because you were like strong enough as a being to break one of the taboo indexes, which was going into the dark territory only slightly. And that means that you had potential to be strong, in that only strong people can actually survive breaking a taboo index. And it's all of this that eventually sort of forces her to sort of, in a way, break down. There's like hints that maybe the Piety Cube thing may happen, but it doesn't. It's just her struggling within herself about the fact that, I have a family, I'm from somewhere else, this is everything I've been told up to now, and it's all wrong. It's really well done, and I think in the anime, when they get the voice acting, the animation on the face, and just seeing her kind of go through this understanding, it's going to be really strong in the anime. Not to say it's not strong here. I just feel like for scenes like that, where it's like you're going for high emotion, you're going for like world shifting revelation for the character, I think it tends to work a little bit better in animation. So I'm really excited to see that scene and how it plays out in the anime. But the core, I suppose, of what happens here is that she basically makes a decision at this point that, okay, you've torn down my world enough to where I believe you. I trust you more than the Axiom Church. And she actively like screams out that like I oppose the church. And what happens is that her right eye begins to activate. The system error comes up and tries to stop her from breaking the taboo index. Kirito tries to stop her because he knows that like her eye will burst if she goes through with it. But she basically like forces Kirito to kind of hold her down as she kind of struggles with this, because she wants to break through this kind of block, and she ends up like obviously destroying her right eye, but she's now quote unquote free, like Yu-Gi-Oh was. So she no longer, I suppose, has to abide by the taboo index and is to some degree free from this. And it's another thing that shows her that what Kirito was saying was true when she sees the system error thing come up in her eye. So it all worked out quite nicely. There's no opportunity here to heal her eye, so she just kind of has like a patch over it because like Kirito does his best to heal her basically. After that it's just they kind of head up a little bit more, and this is obviously getting towards the end of the book at this point, and the plots are about to overlap. They initially encounter the character known as, the Prime Senator, whose name is like Shadolkin, I think it is. And they seem to like initially defeat him. He's established to be this character who's not very powerful at like hand-to-hand combat or weapon combat, but is basically second to Quinella in terms of system commands and like the magic system in the game. But he manages to escape, and this is when the big crossover thing happens and they encounter Yu-Gi-Oh again, but he is an Integrity Knight at this point. There is a couple of more interesting things that happen here, which I'll get to. Mainly, Kirito, there's a point where he just kind of, it's like 2 or 3 pages where he just has a kind of inner monologue about his thoughts on Yu-Gi-Oh, not knowing where Yu-Gi-Oh is, and then there's the talk about the Dark Territory and what to do about it. But I'll cover the Yu-Gi-Oh stuff first. With this, it's fairly quick in that, like, immediately his section of the story jumps into him fighting Bercoli, the first Integrity Knight in the bathhouse. And the idea of this fight, the dynamic, is that his sword deals with time, and Yu-Gi-Oh's sword, of course, is ice. But this is like the most skilled, the most veteran, experienced swordsman, and Yu-Gi-Oh shouldn't be able to win this fight, basically, and it seems like he's not going to in the first place. Bercoli seems to have an idea, compared to everyone else who's shocked by the Aincrad style. Bercoli seems to understand it, at least to a degree, and kind of notes that, like, my style, my sword basically completely counters your style, in that it deals with time. And the best way to explain Bercoli's sword, as far as I understand it, is that basically he makes a slash with his sword and purposefully doesn't even try to connect with you with it. So he moves off away from that spot. But where the slash was kind of stays there, basically, as like a... They don't really put a time limit on it, but it seems like he can just kind of choose how long it stays there for. And the entire arc of that slash just stays there. And they later on in the book basically say that the reason no one can ever defeat him in close combat is that when he starts doing fast combat and doing tons of slashes, they all just stay there. And it effectively forms a prison of slashes around someone, where there's nowhere that they can go. Anywhere they step will result in like an arm being chopped off or something like that. And then of course he can still use his sword just as a physical weapon to hit people as well. And they sort of say that he hasn't even used his full sword release just yet. This is his just like enhanced version. And I think the Prime Senator mentions that it's called like the flip version of your sword, so it seems like he can do something else. Like, I assume because it's time, he could maybe speed it up or slow it down, and it does something really, really crazy. And probably some crazy broken ability as well. But we don't see that yet, because the fight, the way it ends up happening is just that Yu-Gi-Oh! Immediately after one attack where he gets hit realizes that, okay, he's going to have to abandon the majority of the fighting techniques that he knows against this guy. He's going to have to go straight for his sword release, his second stage release, which we haven't seen him use yet. And so he charges that up as kind of Broccoli kind of explains some things to him. But the result is that what Yu-Gi-Oh's new sword technique does is that it basically just engulfs the area in ice. It just flash freezes everything. It's more or less Rukia's Bankai from Bleach, if anyone's familiar with that, in that it's just like completely frozen. It's not to the full degree of Rukia's one where it's like absolute zero, but it forms ice around everything, freezes people in place, and it's magical ice, so it's very strong. But there's a second stage to it as well. He knows that Broccoli will be able to break out of this ice before Yu-Gi-Oh can. So the second stage of it is that this is where the blue rose aspect of the sword comes into play. So these blue roses start to bloom on the ice and begin to suck out the energy of both Broccoli and Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's at this point we get the explanation of, I suppose, the origin of the blue rose sword. Because to unlock both abilities of his sword, Yu-Gi-Oh! Had to connect with it and more or less understand its origin. What object was the blue rose sword created from? And the gist of this story is that the object that the blue rose sword is created from is this kind of like eternal kind of block of ice that is on top of basically the highest mountain in the underworld. That never once decided to freeze until one day like a seed was dropped on top of it, and it decided to melt just a little bit to give it gradual drops of water so it could survive. A blue rose kind of formed from this seed, and eventually the seed, the living flower, would die. So they made an agreement that the ice would like surround the blue rose to kind of keep it frozen in time forever. And so the idea is that the blue rose sword is made from this block of ice that has a rose frozen within it. So it's kind of a dual purpose sword that has the ice powers, but it also has the life-sucking kind of plant powers as well. And the result is that Yu-Gi-Oh feels he can win this fight because Broccoli, being much older than he is, should have a lower kind of base life force or like hit points than Yu-Gi-Oh, and so he should just about survive it. But he more or less accepts that this will be the death of both of them. But what happens is that the Prime Senator, Shadolkin, of course, this guy who's basically number 2 to Quinella, comes in and basically dismisses Broccoli for failing like this and turns him to stone, and then takes Yu-Gi-Oh away. And we're not exactly sure what's going on here. I immediately predicted that they would do the Integrity Knight change, just because I think the wording on it was kind of like, oh, he's kind of in a way like replacing him. He's going to like make Yu-Gi-Oh the best Integrity Knight now. So that was a pretty cool reveal. I was just waiting to see how they'd actually go about doing that, and that like, oh, are we going to see the synthesis ritual? And it seems like we more or less do, because when we catch up with Yu-Gi-Oh next, there's a couple of scenes where it's like he wakes up, he's just in this room, then there's this woman, this like insanely beautiful woman, and they go to great lengths to describe how beautiful she is, and Then like they cut away and it's like she's in his dreams or something like that. It's very like she's in his mind and is kind of manipulating him and is showing him these like visions and so on. And it's meant to be the idea of like she is manipulating him to get him on her side, with the idea being that she wants him to like voluntarily want to become an Integrity Knight and side with her against Kirito, and that will make the synthesis process go much easier, because if you have to force the synthesis, it takes 3 days, but if someone accepts it, it seems to happen with very little problem. So the implication is that Yu-Gi-Oh eventually gives into this manipulation from Quinella. And what the manipulation is that they bring up this idea of seemingly the way Yu-Gi-Oh feels about how people care about him and love him. She brings up like his parents, and that you had to fight with like your brothers for the affection of your parents, and because you were chosen as the kind of the tree carver, you didn't really get any respect despite actually having the most, I suppose, important role within your family. You still didn't get any of the benefits of the kind of money you brought in, showing that they never really loved you. And then they're kind of like, you had an opportunity with like your student, like Ronnie, and then the other one from a couple of volumes ago, who Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito saved from being attacked by those other students. She loved you. You didn't realize it fully yet, but she could have been the one to kind of give you like all of the love on your own, but and you did everything to save her, but stuff happened after that and you were kept away from that. And then I think the big one is that she shows this vision to him of Kirito and Alice kind of together, seemingly playing. They've sort of left Yu-Gi-Oh behind, and the implication, they don't quite fully say it, but that like Alice like leans in close to Kirito as if like it's meant to be they kiss, and it's kind of behind his back and kind of showing that either he's been also isolated from his friend group, but more, I suppose, importantly, we know how Yu-Gi-Oh feels about Alice, and then all of a sudden this is kind of Alice in a way kind of betraying him. It's Kirito betraying him, the person he truly loves being shown to not kind of love him. And they're trying to, I suppose, establish this idea that Yu-Gi-Oh wants someone in his life who will give kind of all of their love to him, sort of like this kind of selfish kind of love. And I think the interesting thing here is this just the manipulation, or is this a more deep-rooted like character thing with Yu-Gi-Oh, where this is how he truly feels? Because I think to some degree he's a somewhat bland character who doesn't have too much to him, and feels a little blank slatey. So this feels like something they're adding to his character, and the fact that he purposefully gave into this, whereas like Alice was established that she had to undergo the forced synthesis ritual to become an Integrity Knight, so she never gave into Quinella's kind of temptations and stuff like that, whereas Yu-Gi-Oh has, apparently. So I assume this will be something that comes out in the fight against Yu-Gi-Oh, if we maybe get back into the true him and how he actually feels about things. Especially now that like Kirito and Alice were together all of this time and have sort of bonded as well. If he sees that they're actually close now, sort of without him, will the true Yu-Gi-Oh commit to what I suppose Integrity Knight Yu-Gi-Oh feels as well? It's an interesting one, because Yu-Gi-Oh right at the end of the book just displays some power, but doesn't really say all that much character-wise about who he is at this point, beyond that he's obviously trying to oppose them. So the full extent of this, I think, has to come out, but it's a big reveal. It's definitely the biggest thing that they've done so far, because Kirito throughout this book talks about how important Yu-Gi-Oh is to him. He's finally found like a best friend in a way for the first time. That he kind of notes that how he has friends like Eagle and Klein, but because they're a little bit older than him, there's a little bit of a distance between them, and and while they still get on, you know, he doesn't really consider them to be his like best friend. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, he's finally found someone similar age. You know, he talks about like best male friend basically, because he acknowledges that like Asuna is his deepest connection that he has, but here is, in terms of a male friend, the best connection that he has, and you know, here's someone who means so much to him. So there's a lot of emotion heading into this fight between Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito, because I suppose of what they each talk about each other about here, in that like Yu-Gi-Oh, I think at the start of this book talks about how, in a way, like he's always Yu-Gi-Oh's always followed Kirito, that Yu-Gi-Oh would be nothing if not for Kirito arriving into his life. And there's a sense of like maybe him feeling like he's in the shadow of Kirito this whole time, and that Kirito has all of this information and has made him who he is. But I don't think they apply that it's jealousy on Yu-Gi-Oh's part, but just that he acknowledges that, and this is his first time getting to, I suppose, be the slightly different version of himself on his own. And the fact that he does kind of fight Berkoli to a draw, or more or less win, shows that growth. But now that they've sort of added in a little bit of a like jealousy aspect to it, betrayal aspect almost, with Quinella's manipulation of Yu-Gi-Oh, are they going to connect all of that stuff together to maybe form a real rift between Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito? Whereas Kirito, the way he talks about Yu-Gi-Oh is, of course, yes, his best friend, but also that in terms of his skills, Kirito acknowledges that Yu-Gi-Oh just has a higher potential than him, and that's a fact. And the only thing that's really between them now is experience. Kirito has more experience than Yu-Gi-Oh does, but Yu-Gi-Oh has a higher potential. How quickly he learned the skills and so on. And that's a big thing, because we know that in games like this, Kirito is an expert. Kirito is a prodigy. So for Yu-Gi-Oh to be even better, that's a really, really big thing. And along with that, Kirito kind of admits that you know, he's seen by so many people as like the hero of SAO, and is really given that hero treatment, but he doesn't really, you know, the wording on it is very interesting in that like he kind of says that, you know, like I sort of accept it and do my best to sort of live up to it, but I know deep down I'm not actually a hero. I'm just someone who's really good at VR games, and I used that skill to become as good as I was at SAO and other games. And he kind of, a little bit down on himself, is just kind of like, I don't have any like significant skills as like a personality or a person. I just I happen to be good at these games, and it means I adapt really well in virtual worlds. We of course know the character there's more to him, and that he brought these groups together, what he's done in all of the arcs up to now, that he's just, you know, being, I suppose, overly humble here and not realizing the impact he has on people. The change he is responsible for why Yu-Gi-Oh is the character that he is at this point. The change he's brought on with Alice here, what he's done for like Asuna and so on, Sinon, over the course of these arcs, you know, that can't be diminished, and that's all stuff with his personality that he sort of brought out, not just a factor of his skill in the game, which is still very impressive. So I really like what they've done here, in that they have a fight. There's a fight that's just about to happen at the end, but along the way we really had a moment where each of them sort of like assessed their relationship with the other one, and then you've added this factor in of one of them, obviously Yu-Gi-Oh being the villain in this case now, has been manipulated into potentially thinking some wrong things going into this fight. So big things to come for sure. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was the Dark Territory stuff that is mentioned here. As I said, it seems like in a way there's this one plot, which is defeat Quinella to stop this overall evil within the world. But then, as Alice points out to Kirito in this book, once you've done that and have taken down the Axiom Church and like the Integrity Knights or whatever, what are you going to do about the fact that we are the only good force fighting against the Dark Territory? And it's this idea that, like, yeah, the Dark Territory have sort of been a little bit forgotten over the course of the last couple of volumes. It's been there, it's been mentioned every so often that they're going to invade, there's a big force that is attacking. What is going to be done, given that Kirito's main thing is that he wants to take down this structure within the, I suppose, good guy part of the world that is manipulating all of these people, taking away people's memories, things he fundamentally disagrees with because they've affected people he cares about. But that organization is the only thing keeping the darkness back, which is going to affect everyone in the underworld. And of course we know that the people in the dark territory are just sort of corrupted fluctolites. They are still beings. They've just been corrupted by darkness caused by the people who created the game in the first place. But they're saying here that the normal people who are just like good and have the potential, I suppose, for good, they shouldn't die in all of this. And the Kirito's only real response to this is like, okay, like he kind of explains to the audience, like in his head, that you know, the reason the world is the way it is, and why it's not your typical video game world, in that it is a game fundamentally that they're in, because it has like all these RPG systems and so on. The reason it's not like SAO, where more or less everyone had like different experience points, people were on different levels, but fundamentally everyone in the game fought the monsters at some point or another. The reason it's not like that is because the Integrity Knights more or less have taken all the experience points. They're the only people in the entire world who fight the dark forces, and thus are the only people who gain experience and gain levels. So that's why there's always this like crazy balance of power in the, I suppose, good side of the world, and why it's just villagers who have no power, nobles who have like learned sword skills and stuff like that, but technically don't have, in terms of level, they don't match up at all to any of the Dark World people. And so it's just the Integrity Knights and then characters like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Kirito, who also have experience points, fighting against the darkness. And the big question come the end of this is, given what the good guys want to do, given what Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! Came to do here, what are they going to do when they get rid of the only people who can be allies to them? Who will help them fight against what is the main enemy in the end? And it's an interesting one, because Kirito's only real answer is that, well, make it more like a typical RPG, basically, and that is tell everyone that, you know, you have the opportunity to fight these monsters and you'll get stronger over time. But then he kind of thinks to himself, like, am I not just being as bad as the villains in this case? Because if you told people to do that, you're forcing them into an army when they've lived their lives in like this completely different way up to now. So there's a big kind of question at play here of, you know, do they destroy the Integrity Knights and the whole system, or do they try to maneuver it into being a true force of good in the world? Because Kirito, of course, is going to do everything, and he'll fight against the Dark World as much as he can, but it seems like there's absolutely a case of like it's the Dark World have the numbers and the power, and then the Integrity Knights are the only notable people. But Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! Have already taken out a bunch of them, so they're taking out the only hope that they really have, and it's this question of like, what's going to happen? Will they be two separate plots, the defeat of Quinella and then versus the Dark World, or will it all be happening at the same time? And what's the reaction to everything that's going on here? Plus the hint that Quinella potentially is like allied in a way with the Dark World because of what's happening, and the Integrity Knights are just even further puppets of this overall scheme. And then that there actually is something real world that's potentially happening here, which I'm still waiting for, I think, the full reveal on that to come out, because I think there has to be some deeper real world stakes that come into play here. Just because they have constantly gone back to the Ocean Turtle to tell us what's going on here, I really do feel that there's going to be something where like Quinella finds a way to like control real world things from within the game and tries to like get out in some way into the real world, and that's like a plot point that comes into play. I'm not really sure though, but I really liked this volume. It was a bit shorter than some of the other volumes. I think it's only about 170 pages compared to most of the others, which are around 200, but I still really liked it. There was a lot of good character stuff, it progressed things, and also suggested that, like, oh, there's a much deeper thing with the Dark Territory, that's what's going to be make up the remaining like 5 volumes, as well as the main plot that we're dealing with right now. So I was a big fan of this volume. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the review and the volume. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.